Hi there, and welcome back to this channel if you have been here before, or welcome if you are new. I'm Sándor, and I'm here to talk about my eating disorder recovery and anything else that's related to the topic. Just a quick disclaimer, I'm not a medical professional or a therapist. I only talk about my recovery because I believe it can be helpful to hear that other people went through the same stuff you are going through and they came out the other end. Keep in mind that these are just my opinions and experiences. Nothing I say is meant to be prescriptive. Some of the things that work for me could work for you as well, but recovery takes some experimentation, and you need to be in charge of that. Guess who dyed their hair green? Not me. This time we are talking about triggers and trigger warnings and whose responsibility they are. I want to take a minute to begin with to acknowledge that the term trigger or triggered, at least in medical terms, was coined to describe a specific event that people who suffer from PTSD or CPTSD experience. When we talk about triggers in the eating disorder recovery space, trigger is something that makes you feel the urge to engage in eating disorder behaviors or something that makes you have eating disorder thoughts. The reason I'm making this distinction is because when PTSD was introduced as a diagnosis in the 1980s, there was less public discourse about mental health, and we had a more limited public vocabulary regarding mental health. Due to the rise of social media, we now have the vocabulary, but we often misuse mental health terms and take them out of context. I understand that language evolves and it is only natural for words to take on additional meanings. Still, these days, we often use the term triggered for things that are not really related to the original meaning, or even worse, we mock people for having a strong emotional reaction by implying that they are triggered. And by doing so, we basically imply that being triggered is about being annoyed or having, some kind of negative emotional reaction, which kind of invalidates the experience of people who are actually suffering from PTSD and actually suffering from flashbacks. Anyway, I think we use trigger warnings when we talk about sensitive topics because we think that this is the kind and compassionate thing to do, and we assume that trigger warnings will help people prepare for or cope with the negative emotional reaction to the triggering material. But is that really true? Well, not for everyone. Some interesting research has been done on the effectiveness of these trigger warnings, and these studies show that whether a trigger warning is beneficial or not largely depends on a person's previous trauma experience, their current mental health, and their personal attitudes toward trigger warnings. Some of these studies suggest that trigger warnings can indeed reduce distress, show no significant impact, or even an increase in negative emotions due to the anticipation of the triggering material. Obviously, how the trigger warning is presented is important, but depending on your background, these warnings can activate your nervous system the same way the actual triggering material would. This means that simply seeing a trigger warning can evoke a negative emotional reaction similar to what you might experience if you engaged with the triggering content. So basically, I can trigger you just by giving you a heads up about the triggering topic. Trigger warnings can also increase avoidance of the triggering content, which may be beneficial and necessary for you at certain stages of your eating disorder recovery or any other kind of recovery. But if you want to recover fully, sooner or later, you will have to start engaging with the triggering material. I think avoidance is fine in certain circumstances and up until a certain point, but avoidance can also become a coping mechanism, and in the long run, it is not a healthy coping mechanism. If you are actively trying to avoid triggering material, that probably comes with a certain level of anxiety, and that anxiety can make it harder for you to confront and process your triggers in a healthy, safe, and controlled manner. On top of that, you can't fully participate in your life if you are stressed about getting triggered all the time. Confronting and processing your triggers will teach you emotional regulation skills, and it will give you confidence that you can manage difficult emotions. So if you don't desensitize yourself to your triggers, you may be more reactive when confronted with them unexpectedly. Reacting to something even more strongly means more distress, which makes it more challenging to effectively cope with triggering situations. If you keep avoiding your triggers, that can reinforce negative associations that you have with them, making them appear more threatening than they actually are, and making it more difficult to manage them over time. And that can make you feel helpless and powerless. And the truth is, you are not powerless when it comes to your triggers. You can be proactive about managing them. For example, if you are at a stage where you can't really engage with your triggers, you can just simply unfollow social media accounts that post triggering content. If certain topics are triggering for you, you can just ask people around you to avoid discussing such topics when you are with them. You can also find assignments in the 8 Keys workbook by Caroline Costin that will help you prepare for these triggering comments, help you deal with these triggering comments. At the end of the day, I think it's up to you to meet yourself where you are and be patient with yourself, but at the same time, be proactive about managing your triggers. You have to be the one who communicates your needs, and you have to create an environment where you can safely and gradually desensitize yourself to your triggers. So the thing is, virtually everything and anything can be a trigger for someone else. So we can't exactly expect the world to be aware of every single trigger that we have. If we, as a collective, were to abstain from anything that can be a potential trigger for someone else, that would probably suck the joy out of our lives. Yeah, we can all contribute to creating an environment that is as trigger-free as possible, and we can all educate ourselves on the topic, but ultimately, at the end of the day, your triggers are your responsibility. Maybe you didn't want to hear that, and that is fine, but here's something else you probably don't want to hear. Those triggers you have are an integral part of your recovery, and if you reframe how you think about them, that can help you make peace with them. Having an overwhelming emotional reaction to one of your triggers is no fun. I don't think anyone would debate that. Well, maybe someone who is intentionally triggering themselves, but that is a discussion for another day. However, your triggers actually serve an important function. They highlight the areas you need to work on in your recovery. So in a way, they can actually be really helpful. That's all I have to say about triggers or trigger warnings today. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section and subscribe to the channel or like the video if you plan to come back. I hope you will have a great day, or at least a reasonable one if you are going through something difficult.